Hi folks, today we're going to talk Chapter 16, Persuasive Speaking. Today we're going to explain what persuasive speaking is, we'll list different types of persuasive speeches, identify persuasive strategies to make us more effective as speakers, look at some organizational patterns, and also talk about ethics. So what does it mean to be a persuasive speaker? What qualities does a persuasive speaker possess? If you think about the people in your lives that have influenced you most, what is it about them that captivates your attention? And how is persuasion important in our daily lives? Every day we receive thousands of messages from people in our lives to commercials to online pieces of information, and they all have an influence on our ideas, beliefs, and actions. So how is that an example, or how are those different examples of persuasion? Now, our book defines persuasion as the art of convincing others to give favorable attention to our point of view. And persuasive speeches are intended to influence the beliefs, attitudes, and values and acts of others. So persuasion is reasoned arguments, which consists of facts, statistics, personal testimonials, experiences, narratives, and they're all employed or used to motivate the audience to think and behave differently than before. Now, there are two major functions of a persuasive speech. One is to convince people. So, for example, when you think about global warming or global climate change, to convince people to have a shift in beliefs and values. So we are establishing an argument and looking for agreement, versus speeches to actuate or to cause action. You're trying to change or motivate a particular behavior. So anything that is trying to sell you or ask you to buy something is an example of speeches to actuate. Now, when it comes to persuasive speeches, there are three propositions: fact, value, and policy. This is a quiz question. So fact is trying to prove that something is true or false. So, for example, aliens, conspiracy theories, those are propositions of fact. They are trying to use evidence to prove something to be true. Propositions of value are to allow us to emphasize or decide something is of great worth. So, for example, in athletics, the MVP. Now, there are facts that you can use to prove your position, but this is really what you place value in, because one person might look at someone's strengths and say that's the best person for that role, or that's definitely the MVP, whereas others might have a different perspective. And then proposition of policy are often related to politics. So again, I bring up global warming, that idea that you're trying to establish an appropriate course of action so that the world can be a better place. Now, when you are choosing a persuasive speech topic, you want to consider the demographics of your audience. You want to know if the audience is going to be receptive or if they are going to have a different belief than you. If your audience is neutral, you have more latitude and more power in the types of persuasive appeals that you use. If you're walking into a hostile audience, especially when it's related to politics, you're going to approach the design of that persuasive speech a little bit differently. And all of those different audiences that you're considering as you're crafting your speech, you want to utilize the persuasive appeals: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is the speaker's credibility, and you establish credibility by being professional, having experience, having a relationship with the audience if possible, and then use of evidence and research. We're going to go more in depth with evidence in just a minute here. Pathos is your emotional appeal. Pathos is the path to your heart, appealing to someone's sense of empathy. Relating to someone's love of something can be really powerful. And logos is the logical arrangement of evidence in a speech. So that's your organization and your reasoning. Now, this is a really great short clip of former President Obama, who gives us different examples of ethos. So ethos is he has a bunch of facts that he presents to us in a reasoned way. Pathos, he's going to talk about children in death and war, which appeals to our emotions. And then logos, he's going to organize his cause and effect. So he's going to use one of the persuasive organization patterns to convince us of something. Now, I said we're going to go through ethos, pathos, and logos just a little bit more specifically. So first, we're going to talk about how we use evidence. Evidence is all about making your message relatable, using something that affects the audience directly, and in using that pattern of audience plus content equals an effective speech. So here is just an example. It is true that if you were giving a persuasive speech trying to convince people to stop smoking, we all know that cigarettes contain thousands of harmful chemicals. That's really general evidence, and you're not going to really establish that credibility unless you get more specific. So, for example, according to Dr. Roger Morissette of Farmington State College, I just said he's a doctor. I just said where my information came from. A single cigarette contains 4,000 chemicals. These chemicals, such as acetone, which is also used in paint stripper and nail polish, is just one of the thousands of cancer-causing agents. That specific use of evidence enhances my ethos. It shows that I've done very specific research, and it shows that I know what I'm talking about. Now, credible sources. When it comes to citing your sources, this is what is all about enhancing that ethos, that expertise based on research. You want to know the publication date, the author's credentials, and any organizational affiliations. You need to cite your sources aloud in a speech. It is so essential, and that is going to be important for 2 of our research speeches this semester. Now, you want to avoid generalizations. Don't state something that people already know. You might have to start there, but you don't want to end there. Then, you want to make sure that your sources are trustworthy and credible. Now, again, what should you include? The author's name, the publisher's name, the date it was published. And here's some sentence starters that you might choose to use to embed your citations out loud in your speech, which is so critical. Now, when we think about pathos, it is possible to go too far with your emotions. So where do people make mistakes? Well, sometimes people are overly graphic or violent. So if something so extreme belongs in a horror film, you try to threaten people or overly frighten them, do this or die, or overly manipulate them, that mom guilt. Sometimes I like to put this on my high school students just a little bit, but if I use it too much, it's not effective. Now, we've talked a little bit more in depth about ethos. We've talked about pathos now. Now let's talk about logos, or that organizational pattern. There's a couple of different patterns that your book talks about. The first is Monroe's motivated sequence. This is very similar to the 5-paragraph essay or the intro 3 body paragraphs and conclusion speech, but it's a little more prescriptive. First, you start with an attention step. Monroe's motivated sequence is awesome if you actually want your audience to go out and change their ideas or beliefs or behaviors immediately. This is a call to action. So you've got your attention step, which is very similar to your introduction. The need, which is the problem, so establishing why we need to pay attention to this issue. Satisfaction is your solutions paragraph. Then 4 is really powerful. It's the visualization step. The visualization step is, if we don't take action now, this will happen. If we do take action now, that will happen. So this is really great, again, when you're talking about something related to the world or environment, because you can really paint a powerful picture for your audience. And then finally, your action step. This is you challenging your audience to go out into the world today to make a change. Other organizational patterns that the chapter talks about is direct pattern, which is problem solution. Causal pattern, which is the most common organization system for a persuasive speech, very similar to the intro 3 paragraphs conclusion, which is problem cause solution. And then refutation is really more of a debate style of presenting. Now that we've reviewed ethos, pathos, and logos in a little more depth, let's take a look here. So, telling an emotional story about the time you adopted your dog and best friend, Ralph, that would be pathos. Then, sharing a logical statistic and facts about the negative effects of energy drinks on your health, that would be logos, looking at logic and using reasoning. And then finally, listening to the CDC explain how masks prevent the spread of disease. CDC, we know it's a credible source, so that's going to be ethos. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about for this chapter is ethical speaking and listening. Ethical speaking is being honest, speaking with integrity and morality in our everyday lives, And it's important when we're preparing and delivering a speech. When we're persuading people or trying to convince them to shift their beliefs and ideas, we want to make sure that we're acknowledging all sides of an argument. We aren't overlooking or misspeaking about facts and statistics, and we want to know the occasion for which we are speaking. Ethical speaking, it sets responsibility for speech goals, promotes diversity, uses inclusive language, and avoids hate speech. So often we see politics, we see people throwing hate towards all sides of an idea or belief. And we want to make sure that in order for us to all work together, and in order for us to be persuasive and effective in our speeches, we need to be inclusive in that. And ethical speaking allows us to use respectful, free speech, raise social awareness, educate others, and empower others to make positive change. So how is that relevant to you? Then on the other side, there's ethical listening. What does ethical listening look like? Well, ethical listening allows us to actively interpret and analyze the content of a speech, allows us to display respect for the speakers and listen with our whole body. Even if we disagree with someone, it's so important that we listen with an open mind and are respectful as the listeners of information. So that's a little bit about persuasion. I cannot wait to hear your persuasive speeches.